Hi Ron, back to the second part of Lonely Heart, one of the short stories by Damon Runyon from his book entitled On Broadway. And Nicely Jones is in hospital and he doesn't have anybody that is love of his life or anybody to come and visit, so he answers a Lonely Hearts advert in a magazine that he was given to read in the hospital. And the lady turns up. Let's see what happens next. She is anywhere between 40 and 55 years of age, and she is as big and raw-boned as a first baseman. But she is by no means a crow. In fact, she is rather nice looking, except that she has a pair of eyes as pale as hen's eggs, and these eyes never change expressions. She asks Nicely as many questions as an assistant district attorney, and especially if he has any money. And does he have any relatives? And Nicely is able to state truthfully that he is all out of both, although she does not seem to mind. She wishes to know about his personal habits, and Nicely says that they are all good. But of course, he does not mention his habit of tapping out any time a 4 to 5 shot comes along, which is as bad as a habit as anybody can have. And finally, she says she is well satisfied with him and will be pleased to marry him when he is able to walk. She has a short, sharp voice that reminds Nicely of a tough starter talking to the jockeys at the post, and she never seems to smile and takes all around. The chances are she was not such a character as Nicely would choose as his ever-loving wife if he had to pick as hard. But he figures that she's not as bad as an offhand draw. So Nicely and the widow Crumb are married, and they go to live on our farm in central New Jersey. And it is a very nice little farm to be sure, if you care for farms. But it is 10 miles from the nearest town and in a very lonesome country. And furthermore, there are no neighbors handy, and the widow Crumb does not have a telephone or even a radio in her house. In fact, about all she has on this farm are a couple of cows, and a horse, and a very old jerkin with a chin whisker and rheumatism and a mean look, whose name seems to be Harley something, and who also seems to be the widow Crumb's hired hand. Nicely can see at once that Harley has no use for him, but afterward he learns that Harley has no use for anybody much, not even himself. Well, it comes on supper time the first night. Nicely is there, and he is delighted to observe that the widow Crumb is making quite an uproar in the kitchen, with the pots and the pans, and this uproar is music to Nicely's ears, as by now he is in the mood to put on the hot meat very good, and he is wondering if the widow Crumb is an excellent cook, as she lets on in her advertisement. It turns out that she is even better. It turns out that she is as fine a cook as he ever straddles a skillet, and the supper she spreads for Nicely is too good for a king. There is round steak, hammered flat and fried in a pan, and thick cream gravy, and hot biscuits, and corn on the cob, and turnip greens, and cottage fried potatoes, and lettuce with hot bacon grease poured all over it, and apple pie and coffee, and I do not know what all else. And Nicely almost founders himself, because it's his first time since he leaves the hospital that he gets a chance to move into real food. Harley, the old Joskin, eats with them, and Nicely notices that there is a fourth place set at the table, and he figures that maybe another hired hand is going to show up, but nobody appears, and to fill the vacant chair. And at first Nicely is glad of it, as it gives him more room in which to eat. But then Nicely notices that the widow Crumb loads the plate at the vacant table place, and even more food than she does any of the others. And all through the meal, Nicely keeps expecting someone to come and knock off these victuals. Oh, nobody ever appears, however, and when they are through eating, the widow Crumb clears up the extra place the same as the others, and scrapes the food off the plate and into the garbage pail. Well, of course, Nicely is somewhat perplexed by this proceeding, but he does not ask any questions because, Where he comes from, only suckers go around asking questions. The next morning at breakfast and again at dinner, and in fact at every meal put on the table, the extra place is fixed, and the Widow Crumb goes through the same performance of serving the food to this place, and afterwards throwing it away. And while Nicely commences thinking it is a great waste of excellent food, he keeps his trap closed. Now, being the Widow Crumb's husband is by no means a bad dodge, as she is anything but a Gabby Judy, and will go all day long without saying more than a few words. And as Nicely is a character who likes to chat, this gives him a chance to do all the talking, although she never seems to be listening to him much. She seldom asks him how to do any work, except now and then to help the old Juskin around the barn. So Nicely commences to figures this is about as soft a drop-in as anybody can wish. The only drawback is that sometimes the Widow Crumb likes to sit on Nicely's lap of an evening. And as he does not have much lap to begin with, and is getting less every day under her feeding, this is quite a handicap. But he can see that it comes of her affectionate nature, and he bears up as best he can. One evening, after they are married several months, the Widow Crumb is sitting on what is left of Nicely's lap, and she puts her arms around his neck and speaks to him as follows. "Nicely," she says, "do you love me?" "Love you?" Nicely says. "Why, I love you like anything, maybe more. You're a wonderful cook. How can I help loving you?" he says. "Well," the Widow Crumb says, "do you ever stop to consider that if anything happens to you, I will be left here alone and lorn, because you do not have any means with which to provide for me after you are gone?" "What do you mean after I'm gone?" Nicely says. "I'm not going anywheres." "Life is always a very uncertain proposition," the Widow Crumb says. Who can say when something is apt to happen and to you and take you away from me, leaving me without a cent of life insurance?" Naturally, Nicely has to admit to himself that what she says is very true. And of course, he never gives a matter a thought before, because he figures, but from the way the Widow Crumb feeds him, that she must have some scratch of her own stashed away somewhere, although this is the first time the subject of money is ever mentioned between them since they are married. "Why," Nicely said, "you are quite right. I will get my life insured as soon as I get enough strength to go out and raise a few dibs. Yes, indeedy. I will take care of this situation promptly." Well, the Widow Crumb says there is no sense in waiting on a matter as important as this, and that she will provide the money for the payment of the premiums herself, and for Nicely to forget about going out to raise anything, as she cannot bear to have him out of her sight for any length of time. And then she gets to telling Nicely what she's going to give him for breakfast, and he forgets about the insurance business. But the next thing Nicely knows, a thin character with a nose like a herring comes out from town. And there is another character with him who has whiskers and smells of corn whiskey, but who seems to be a doctor, and in practically no time at all, Nicely's life is insured for $5,000, with double indemnity if he gets used up by accident. And Nicely is greatly pleased by this arrangement because he sees that he is now worth something for the first time in his career, although everybody on Broadway claims that it is a terrible overlay by the insurance company when they hear the story. Well, several months more go by, and Nicely finds life in the farm very pleasant and peaceful, as there is nothing much for him to do but eat and sleep. And he often finds himself wondering how he ever endured his old life following the races and associating with low characters of the turf. He gets along first class with the Widow Crumb, and never has a cross word with her, and he even makes friends with the old Joskin Harley by helping him with his work, although Nicely is really not fitted by nature for much work. And what he likes best at the farm is the eating and the sleeping, especially the eating. Well, we'll leave it at that for today. And we'll see if there's anything behind this insurance policy being taken out on him. although nicely seems to dismiss anything wrong. Until tomorrow, and I'll read you a bit more. I hope you're enjoying it. If you are, please give me a thumbs up, always helps. And stay safe, won't you? Bye-bye now. God bless.